Welcome to Implicating the Real. My name is Michael. I'm joined by my good friend Joe. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm good. A little sick, but we're gonna work through it.
Move from the wave to the salute.
Correct.
We're good. And we're joined by our good friend Liana. Liana, how are you?
Great.
Good. We're talking Seth Speaks, of course, continuing with chapter 10. It's titled, quote unquote, Death Conditions in Life. And I just wrote under there in parentheses, dreaming, because that's kind of what he's, right off the bat, he's doing a little trick or like reframing what we think of as dreaming, and maybe a little bit more than dreaming, but this is what he's referring to as death conditions.
I love the chapter heading. I thought it was so slick.
Yeah?
Yeah, from like last time being like, we're talking about death, and then this time being like death conditions in life. You know?
Right, because I mean, you could have just called it dreaming and we wouldn't have like pulled in the same context from the last chapter. Right off the bat, it is kind of like similar to what he's been saying in the previous chapter, but he says, after-death experiences will not seem so alien or incomprehensible if you realize that you encounter similar situations as a normal part of your present existence. So dreaming, and he gets into a lot of, how our dreams are operating, and also just deeper parts of our consciousness that are operating while we're awake. That's kind of what he's getting at.
Mm-hmm.
You guys got anything right off the bat?
I just didn't expect this chapter to go like so deep into the dreaming stuff, but it really is just like dreaming the chapter, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about it maybe in a previous one, but like there's this part at the beginning about how like dreams are basically like the other half of your like personality. Like I think he says you have this store of memories that leads to the continuity of your like physical existence.
Yeah.
And there's an equally large store of like dream memories that lead to like a continuity of like your dream existence.
Yeah.
And like at first he sort of sets up this parallel where it's like these are two halves of like sort of your experience as like a being. But then like as the chapter sort of goes on for a couple pages, it sort of almost starts feeling like the dreaming part is like more fundamental or more central to your personality than like the physically awake part, which I thought was like really interesting.
Yeah. And he definitely almost says that explicitly, I think.
Because
There's a quote, I hope to find it later, but he says something like that your dreaming self is, I think the term he uses is like as a reference point to like the deeper parts of yourself, which I was thinking of that as like, the self is this thing that, like we think we know it, and then we swim a little deeper, and then only then do we realize it gets deeper, and then we can swim a little deeper and only then realize it gets deeper.
Yeah.
I feel like, Joe, you'd be really curious about this aspect of Seth, and I don't know if he gets into it in this book, but a little preview that there is such thing as Seth II.
Seth II, like
So it's like
different
a deeper part of Seth that Seth has to like receive in the way that Jane receives Seth, and then like somehow they like relay that back to Jane.
That's so anime. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like
another layer.
Yes. Oh, I'm doing Super Saiyan like 4 actually. It's like a whole different thing. You gotta like do Super Saiyan 3, but then do this other thing.
Yeah. And this came up in our book club recently that somebody was talking about a recording. Have you heard of
I hadn't heard.
Somebody said that there's a recording of Jane speaking as Seth II, and it sounds like a little girl. Because it's like it's like psychologically so distant or something. So the voice change like represents.
Well, yeah, because the more powerful you get, the smaller physically you get, right? You condense all the power into a tiny little girl's body.
Or it's just like, I mean, yeah. It's like, I just feel like it's like such a big part, and it's like so constrained. So like maybe that tiny voice like represents like the constraint it has to put on itself just to like pop in and say hi.
Huh. Yeah, I'm interested in Seth too. That's amazing.
I just thought like, yeah, you seem interested in a lot of like, I don't know, how would you describe
The
that?
peripherals, the
Yeah.
minutia. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, has Seth ever popped in for like a bathroom break,
It's like, oops, sorry, I didn't know you're in here.
Yeah, didn't know you were in here. My bad. Like, what's the logistics on being, an enlightened being like that?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, that's just to your point that, because it's easier for us to understand, I think, that, the dreaming consciousness forms a dyad with our waking consciousness.
Yeah.
But I think one of the coolest things about Seth is it always goes deeper.
Yeah. Do you want to get in? I can read that quote maybe because that's like a good,
Sure.
I think, point to make. I think it was in 136. The thing about the like dream part being sort of like a focus point. So in the middle of 136, it says, the dreaming self as you conceive it, however, is but a shadow of its own reality, for the dreaming self is a psychological point of reference and, in your terms, of continuity that brings together all portions of your identity. Of its deeper nature, only the most developed are aware. It represents, in other words, one strong uniting facet of your entire identity. Its experiences are as vivid and its personality as rich, in fact richer, in context as the physical personality that you know.
That's the exact quote I was thinking of.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was deeper into it, but
So, like, is the reason that it is sort of this focal point that it has this relationship with, like, the after-death experience? Is that kind of the point that's being made? That, like, because this, like, dreaming personality is closer to the personality that you have in, like, an after-death sense, it sort of forms this, like, very convenient, like, contextual point in your, like, personality?
I took it to mean is just because we have a sense of familiarity with that. Like you need some familiarity in order to be a reference point. Does that make more sense?
Right. Like it's still accessible to you as like a physical person.
Yeah, like when he talks about, our dreaming consciousness, even if we don't remember a lot of our dreams, we can understand what he's getting at.
I took it to mean something else, that yeah, your dreams, you can contact your reincarnational selves and you start to see like the broader picture above physical reality. Because in dreams is what we test out probable futures. And so that's like this uniting facet across all your probable selves and all your reincarnational selves. It's almost like a bigger you.
Yeah, I think that isn't mutually exclusive. What I'm trying to say is that just like our dreaming, it includes all that. And later he gets into, the difficulty of describing, I think here it says, now no psychological structure is easy to describe in words, simply to explain the nature of personality as it is generally known. All kinds of terms are used: id, subconscious, ego, superego, all of these to differentiate the interweaving actions that make up the physical personality. The dreaming self is just as complicated, so you can say certain portions of it deal with physical reality, physical manipulation, plans, some deeper levels of creativity and achievement that ensure physical survival, and just goes on. But like, I guess the way I'm relating to what we're just talking about is that like our reference point for all of the complexity that happens in dreaming is just this dreaming self, right? In the same way, to understand our whole psychology as a waking consciousness, there's different levels of the dreaming self that we just lump it all together because, we just have a very dull awareness of it at this point.
Sure.
I really like that paragraph you read, though.
I like the one right above it. I just like the phrase fleshy projection. Seth says that you're merely a fleshy projection of your dreaming self. That's all your physical body is.
Yeah, so not only is he kind of like pointing at this diet, but he's saying that that's more primary, and we're more of, not only does the dreaming self think of us as the dream, but that's actually more true.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's what he says, right? Is like, from the context of the dreaming self, like all of the stuff that we do is sort of just like the way we think about like dream narratives.
Yeah. When you're talking about the memory thing too, the continuity of memory, I think that checks out with my just personal experience of dreams. How many times I've like had dreams of like I'm interacting with people that are obviously familiar to me in that context, but when I wake up, I'm like, I don't know who exactly they were. And like, so like in the challenge of trying to keep a dream journal and translate that to like verbal language, I'm often describing people that I'm interacting with as like this friend or like this relative, because that's like the closest context I have to describing them.
Right. Well, and it could be them too, right?
Yeah, it could be them. And then he gets into like the complicated, or maybe we'll get into quotes about this, but like how we translate our dreams into waking life terms, and that muddies it even more.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, he talks about all, the deep layers of dreams, and they get like translated through the subconscious until it gets to us. And so it can be like a generation loss thing almost.
So when we're talking about like the dreaming self, like in terms of like the entity like levels, like the dreaming self is at the same level as like the physical self, right? Like we as a dyad are in a relation to like the entity, which is like higher than like both of us, sort of thing.
Well, I think that's where the reference point thing comes in.
Okay.
Because I think, like for us, everything is in that direction. And we, at a certain level of awareness, we're just lumping all that into the dreaming self. But like at some point in that direction, it branches off, and not just in a linear fashion, and like multi-directional,
Yeah. We're like a peninsula.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by
We're like a branch on a tree.
yeah.
And when you go back, everything going back towards our deeper self is, from this point of view, or from a shallow point of view, we can call the dreaming self, but it gets more complicated than that. You can take a left turn into like another counterpoint or what am I trying to say? Counterpart, yeah. Or like reincarnational life or something.
But to us, that's all the direction of the dreaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember like last chapter, he was talking about like after death, like once you like digest your personal life, then you can become aware of these other lives kind of thing.
Right.
And that kind of makes sense in that context.
Yeah, it lines up with sort of like the levels you'd have to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's why it's a good point to like highlight that chapter or that paragraph you read, because that really frames it up nicely.
Regarding the continuity of memory, I wanted to mention that when I took the dreaming course offered by the Seth Center, one of the exercises they encouraged us to try was that if we can become lucidly aware that we're dreaming in our dream or in our sleep, try to remember if you enter sleep with lucidity, try to remember what happened in the dream before you fell asleep.
Right.
Which shouldn't be possible if you were not, quote unquote, there for it. But they were trying to illustrate that the dream self and the dream reality is constantly happening even when you're awake.
That's really interesting. Have you ever been able to do that?
Not that specifically, but I have been able to become lucid, yeah.
Yeah. But sorry if I was a little distracted, but so you're saying like once you become aware of your dream and try to remember
What
the
happened?
previous continuity of that dream before you fell asleep.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about it. When we're talking about like this dreaming self has its own continuity of dreams, and like it's pretty cool. Because that's the subjective experience, whether you like consciously do that exercise or not. Like you kind of feel like you're right in the middle of a story when you start dreaming, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and like in the Sethian sense too, right? Like if the dreamscape is continually existing, there needs to be someone experiencing it, right? Because it's part of your perception is like making it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to make the counterpoint, like what is our conception of dreams that we just like have based on our assumptions before we come to these ideas? Like it's just the mind creating some comforting noise while the body rests.
I think the accepted medical or scientific explanation now is that that's just your mind's way of processing the day-to-day events. Kind of like garbage collection where you're just getting all the crap.
Yeah.
That's what most people believe. And Seth would say that most people also believe they're not supposed to be able to recall their dreams, so most people don't.
Huh.
Yeah.
I bet I bet there's research out there on that about like, cross-culturally, like if you look at different cultures where like dreams are supposed to be like very meaningful and important, I bet people have better like dream recall, you
Big
know?
time, yeah. One of my friends is able to recall every dream, always. Like, it just came she also reads Seth, it just came up in conversation, I was like, "Wait, so you never struggle to remember dreams?" And she was like, "Yeah, I just thought everybody was like that." Just no, because we had this other friend who insists that he does not dream, but he does use a lot of marijuana. But he was like, "I have had one dream that I can remember in the past, like, 2, 3 years," and I'm like, "No, buddy. You've read the books, like, you know that you dream, you just don't remember it because you don't probably because you don't wanna remember them."
Yeah, I think the weed probably has something to do with it too. I feel like that affects my memory pretty significantly if I'm using it.
It's also the expectation, like, with my friend in particular that he insists and believes that he does not dream and he
Yeah,
does not he's not able to remember dreams. I'm like, "No, you can though, if you just
I've,
change your perception."
I've had friends too also that say like, yeah, I ask them if they have a lucid dream and they act like, oh yeah, I'm always lucid in my dreams. And I'm like, sometimes they're just confusing what like I mean about
Oh,
lucidity, but like,
Yeah, they mean they're just like they have really good memory of like the sensation or whatever.
but there's people that do very casually have like a pretty high level of awareness in their dreams for whatever reason.
I wish I was like your friend. That sounds great. Just like always remembering every dream.
yeah, right? Do you have a dream journal? Do you try to recall? Because it does get easier if you actually practice doing it.
Yeah, I practiced it for a while. I haven't done it in a bit. But yeah, once I started keeping a journal, like the dream like recall was better, the vividness was better, like the lucidity got more frequent.
Yeah, yeah. It helps to before you do anything when you wake up, to start recalling it. Like, even before
Yeah.
you change positions, sometimes getting back in the same, like, sleeping position you're in when you woke up can help.
Hmm.
Some people, instead of writing them down, because you gotta, like, get up and get the notebook and pen,
Oh yeah.
they just dictate it, vocally into their phone. I type it in.
I feel like that would be so much more convenient. Because if you're sitting there trying to like write it down, you're just like, I've been here for like an hour writing this.
You know, it takes a long time.
It's like a commitment if you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, now there's technology that can like transcribe that too, right?
Yeah.
That makes me rethink how I should be doing this.
I feel honestly though, Michael, like as a like writing exercise, I find it like really like creatively useful.
Yeah.
Cause like sometimes I'll feel like I like just kind of like get in the zone because I'm still like sort of half awake. And like the way that it gets dictated out just like comes out more poetic than I would like normally write,
Really?
because you're all like focused on like kind of intoning like the sensory stuff, but also the
Yeah.
emotional stuff. Cause in dreams, like those things kind of blend together. And it's like the stuff that comes out is like usually kind of like creatively interesting.
That's a good point because I feel like we wouldn't necessarily prioritize the same things that seem to be prioritized in our dream experience, right?
Right.
It's like the emotional reality is actually very primary, where whether that is or isn't in waking life, we often are under the mindset that it's not necessarily, we think of it more of as an effect than a cause
Right.
in waking life.
True.
And yeah, I've always found too that it's brought up some unique writing challenges when trying to like transcribe. Like for those reasons, it's a lot of like abstract sort of, like you have this like, that is some of the challenges as a writer. Like you have this like weird vague certainty, and like how do I express this in words?
Right. Yeah. The creative challenge of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What you were saying, like, too, also reminds me of like this one thing in this chapter, like Seth talks about. Maybe I'm skipping too far ahead. On page 38, we've got like the conditions that you need to meet, like as a person before you should start like doing sort of like
Yeah,
investigation into your dreams.
let's get into that.
I thought it was interesting that like the first thing that he says is like, if you have like a really rigid structure of like good and evil, like you're not going to be able to do it,
Mhm.
Where it's like you need to sort of be able to tap into this very like fluid sort of like way of like experiencing stuff.
Yeah, and I wonder if he means that generally or specific to our like society, like our ideas of good and evil. I'm imagining having these rigid ideas, then you're bringing that level of expectation into the dream world and then you're creating them, right? It's like just the idea that you think evil exists as a force, and a lot of people do. They think there's like this, everything exists in opposites, and there can't be good without evil. It's just kind of silly when you think about it, but
Right. So yeah, like in your dream world, you're going to end up making stuff that like is in these weird like pairs.
yeah. That's what one of the biggest lessons I got in my foray into like Buddhism and meditation is that trying to see the evil actions of other people as ignorance at some level, which is an exercise in a lot of different things. But one of them is just understanding that maybe evil doesn't exist as a force. It also brings you into like spaces of like forgiveness and stuff like that, which is helpful not only with your interactions with others, but for yourself too.
Right. Yeah. But you want to read the one about the demon or whatever? I thought that one was fun.
If you got it, I was going to mention too, it's not just, he mentions depression also as something that if you're experiencing, you shouldn't bring that into, creating in the dream world.
What did you guys think about that?
The depression part?
Yeah.
Seth has straight up said that like all illness, including mental illness, is a result of beliefs, including depression. It's just depression. I think he said is a result of just having overall really strong negative beliefs about the world and yourself and your relation to the world. So it makes sense to me because if you're going to believe that everything is bad, your dreams are like physical reality in that your beliefs, expectations, thoughts, and feelings are reflected much faster without the time delay. So you're just gonna have a bad time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some sense, this reality is kind of a training ground for creating your reality, because there is this lag that actually is very helpful when you're caught in some more negative expectations and beliefs. And yeah, depression, like from my own experience and from what I know of like friends and stuff, there's often like some self-esteem issues. So like, I think the idea is like your arena of challenge should be on physical life before you take it to the next level.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense. The reason I asked is like when I was doing a lot of dream journal stuff, I felt like I was in like the most depressed period of my life is like when I was doing a lot of that stuff. And to me, it seems very natural that like if you're curious about those kind of things, like the type of person who's experimenting with them is like probably not in like the best mental state, is like my impression of people who do a lot of like dream journal and like investigation stuff is like it gives you sort of this like sort of other like realm of escape from like bad reality situations, which like I could see as like a trap, right?
And he says here, you should not embark upon such a study if you hope to substitute inner experience for physical experience.
Right.
It's interesting. I think that applies in a lot of areas, right? Like I was just talking last night with my partner. We're just talking about like how you need to be kind of like healthy with your own like mental, emotional health before you can expect to have a healthy emotional relationship with other people.
Yeah, you got to put your mask on before you help people around you.
At the same time, I don't think it like strictly applies that you need to be like perfect before you like embark on an interaction with another human being. You know what I mean? But like,
right,
understanding that like, part of your problems with a relationship could be just, something you could sort out in your own mental health. It could be helpful.
Right. It just gives you like a more refined, more simple to use like toolkit, right?
Yeah.
Just sort of worked on those things ahead of time.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Joe, like just your background in philosophy and your own personal experience, like what have been your conceptions of like evil or like as a concept?
Oh my gosh, man. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately for no particular reason.
Not because of just
the climate that we live in I guess, yeah, I've gone through a couple phases, right? Like I did the sort of like big brain scientific materialist sort of like, well, obviously like evil doesn't exist. It's just various states of utilitarian good.
Mhm.
I don't mean that something's evil because it's evil. I mean that it's bad because it causes pain,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But I think somewhere in the middle of like my philosophical education, I sort of got away from the utilitarian ethics because I think that that's sort of like the assumed default that most people in society, whether or not they admit it, kind of work on nowadays.
Could
Like, I
be.
think the humanism has sort of soaked into the culture where, like, if you ask somebody about morals, eventually they'll talk about, like, well, how many people benefit, like, type thing.
Yeah.
But I moved away from that kind of ethics, So then for a while, I, like, didn't really have a place for evil anyways. So, like, I didn't really believe in it as an idea. I've sort of been kind of recently trying to come up with an explanation for what evil could be defined as, right? Where, like, I think there is bads, like moral bads.
Mhm.
And I think that that's not what's captured by the idea of evil. But I think that there's something really provocative about people who are able to talk about evil as like a thing,
Hmm.
And I think I'm sort of tempted to give them the benefit of the doubt on it. Because I think one of the arguments people make is like, if you don't believe in evil, you just like maybe haven't experienced it before. And like the people who really like to talk about it are people who have seen some like really fucked up shit.
Yeah.
Like Tolkien, right? Like one of Tolkien's like huge things is like he's super anti-war, right? Because he was in World War I. So to him, like the war itself was like so evil and the things that people did to each other were so evil that it's like, this is like a spiritual like thing. Like this isn't just like something that's in humankind. This is like something like supernaturally bad, Like the amount of sheer suffering that gets like concentrated on a battlefield is like something else.
So he's like implying that it's because it's so horrific that it has to be like supernatural or more than just like human creation.
It's psychologically like objectionable in a way that like badness isn't,
Yeah.
is kind of my takeaway.
And then so like this, it's been a while since I've like watched Lord of the Rings or anything, but like it seems like there's a lot of war in those stories too, right?
But like you can see that like the provocation of it is that there are beings that are just by their nature, like they are made twisted. And that is why they do war. Like the orcs are like, they're bad because they're bad. They're evil because they're made to be evil.
I feel like as a writer, I feel like evil is kind of cliche. It's like the easiest way to like suck someone into a context of a story. I think I'm in the same way. I'm probably, because I'm interested in these Sethian ideas, that like I'm interested in like a newer kind of story that has like complexity. So there's some good parts. If there's a villain, there's some good parts to that person. Like everybody's complex and ambiguous, and like the battle isn't between this group of people and this group of people, but it's like there's a line in whoever said it first, but the line between good and evil isn't between this country and that country or these people and those people. It runs in the middle of every person's heart, something along those lines.
Sure.
So I think as a storyteller, to me, it's more impressive if you can pull off a feat where you can still think of it in terms of good versus evil, but like those battles happen within everyone involved in the story, not just between these people and those people.
Yeah. So like my current definition, I guess, for like what I think you could say evil is kind of relates to that. Listener, please don't steal this one. Let me write the paper on it. But like my current like running definition is like a moral bad is a thing that you can like remove from the world, and like that's just like you've gotten rid of a bad, right?
Mhm.
Like somebody's hungry and you feed them. Like you do not take on like much of a burden besides the practical burden of like feeding the person, right? The world becomes net better from you doing that. So like moral bads are things that can be overcome, but like evils are things that like to overcome them, you yourself become worse. Like they are a moral trap in that they're so bad that they need to be getting rid of, but you can't get rid of them in any good way.
Well, I was going to go in a little bit of that direction again with war, and like where our world currently is involved in some wars and various entities are enabling or or participating in them.
Right.
And I was going to get into even like Lord of the Rings, like, again, correct me if I'm like misremembering any of the plots, but like, there's this existent evil forces, and doesn't it more or less force the people that are good to have to engage in that level?
Right. And like
And then, so you're
like
complicit. Is this what you're talking about? Like,
yeah. Like
yeah.
there's the like really difficult thing of like I do think that pacifism as a moral philosophy is like the most coherent philosophy in relation to violence.
Mhm.
Like there's no one I think that can make like an argument for war that's better than the pacifist argument against it.
Mhm.
However, if you look at history and you look at like the history of like atrocities that have happened in the world, there is something compelling about the sheer amount of evil that can happen if people are left unchecked, that like there is sort of a practical point of saying like the morally higher stance is pacifism, but I'm okay with taking the lower stance to prevent this incredibly great evil, Like it's just like even like more morally weighty somehow.
Yeah. I know we're getting off on a tangent, but I'm finding this a little bit interesting. I think I brought it up last time, or maybe it was off air, but we got into like Seth's concept of like the ends don't justify the means sort of thing. And I feel like that's part of the trap that helps perpetuate war, is like so many people on one side of a war or another think like, I have to fight this war in order to end the war.
Right.
When they're literally like creating the hell that they're fighting against.
See, and that's maybe, right?
Well, and then I wanted to bring this up too, and this is a Sethian concept that I don't think is like, perforated our Western view of things, but like we think of like the only alternative is like pacifism, right? But there's a quote here later in the chapter 145. It's not talking about evil specifically, but he says, if you think strongly of an object, somewhere it will appear. If you think strongly of being in another location, a pseudo image of yourself will be projected out from you to that place. And that, extending that concept into what we're talking about with evil, Seth says like, hating war will never bring peace, but loving peace will bring peace. Something along those lines. Does that ring familiar to you, Liana?
Mm-hmm.
So like it might be thought of as pacifism in like our conception of action, but like actually you could, before we got together here, we were talking about a friend who was just doing some Sethian exercise. Like you could just like actively meditate on peace. And Seth is saying that that's like an active way to help bring about peace.
Yeah. Yeah, like we've talked about this before, right? The day where everyone like meditated on like kindness or whatever, or love or whatever.
Yeah, I had never really looked into it in depth, but yeah, I heard that there was a day that like all these people around the nation said, okay, set your clocks. At this time, we're all going to meditate for an hour. And apparently like crime dropped in all these different places.
Because the meditators weren't out robbing people, right?
Yeah.
We've done that one before.
At least that's the correlation.
What do you think?
When you were saying earlier that pacifism is an ideal and it's not as practical as keeping people in check, that line of thinking assumes that cause and effect is the reality of how our universe works.
Yeah, it does assume that.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what Seth is saying is the complete flaw. So if you disconnect yourself from seeing physical cause and effect as a legitimate mechanism and you see it as a myth, which is what Seth is saying, and you pull yourself into like how Seth would see it, he would say that war is never necessary. He has explicitly said that even a kill in self-defense is bad.
Right.
Because when you get to that point where you're having to hurt someone to defend yourself, you already messed up for weeks, months, years before that in your mental actions. You have been believing and expecting and feeling and thinking that you are in a state of danger where someone else could do this thing to you, and you essentially manifested it.
Right.
And I think in Individual and Nature of Mass Events, Seth says that there are other physical realities where, like other probable realities, where none of the world wars happened, where everything is prosperous, people just don't starve. Because their belief system is just completely different from ours. Where almost everyone on the planet today thinks, it's hard to make a buck in this world. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Everybody's out to get each other. Life is a zero-sum game.
Right.
But, it isn't? Apparently not, because we're told that physical reality is just essentially a science lab. When you take chemistry or biology, there's a lab component. We're told, Seth is basically saying physical reality is just a lab component for baby gods in training. So when I see it in that perspective, there is no evil. When you were talking about how you can remove a bad by just giving somebody food when they're hungry, and that's a net good. I don't agree, because the immediate example that came to mind was, okay, you're removing the suffering of the person who's feeling hunger and pain. If I just walk into a third grade class who's taking a math test on multiplication, I just give them all the answers. Well, I just removed all their suffering and pain. Now they don't have to go home and study, but is that really a net good? I just screwed all these kids out of the incentive of learning something they would need to know to understand the world better.
Do you think that people starving though is helping them learn about the world?
Yes, I do, because Seth has said that one of his reincarnations was as a beggar mother of 12 children or 11
Something
children.
like that, yeah.
And it was because he had to learn to appreciate the simpler things in life, where his other lives, he was a pope, he was a wealthy spice merchant, but he had forgotten the pleasures of just a simple piece of bread. And he talked about how every day was this joyous moment of waking up and realizing none of her kids had passed away in the night. And that was an integral life for him to learn, I guess, humility and just simple things. I know it's a really controversial thing to say, but when you look at people who get past life regressions, they do say that they will reincarnate as someone with difficulties like that, so that they can learn better how to not commit the mental mistakes that would put them in such a position. And it also teaches empathy, because if you live a lot of lives as trust fund babies, you're really not going to get that much of a rounded education, versus if you live a life as a beggar and you're just oh, it's not really that easy to just sit there and think of abundance all the time. When you have these super realistic challenges that are in front of you, it's really hard to have the self-control to keep your mental actions in a certain state.
Mm-hmm.
Don Juan in Castaneda also expressed that idea, and it was super shocking to me when I first came across it. He was expressing some sort of spiritual envy of someone starving. At the same time, I think it does get into an ambiguous kind of gray area, because I think that element exists, but I don't think you're necessarily, if someone's starving or creating their life in order to have a starving experience, you coming along and giving them food shouldn't prevent them from continuing to create that experience going forward. And so I do get morally confused sometimes, how much intervention should I provide? Because I think Seth says somewhere, it's always a good thing to help another
You should
living
always
being.
help. Yeah, he has said that you shouldn't damn the poor and think, oh, well, they created their circumstances, so I shouldn't help them. You should
Well,
always try to help.
And yeah, I was saying about getting away from the utilitarian argument type thing, even, it's whether or not
giving them the food helps them,
reduces their suffering, giving them the food makes me the type of person that feeds them, which is good for me,
Mm-hmm. I think that's also a healthy thing for people to get into, doing things that help other people for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was hinting at earlier when I was talking about when I was learning the values of forgiveness, or the value of not holding grudges. Some of the primary benefits are selfish benefits, and I think in that sense we have to be a society that embraces selfishness, if we're going to use that term to describe it.
Yeah, or at least self oriented, right?
Yeah.
In terms of your morals, because then it's you're just trying to continue to make yourself the best version you can.
Yeah.
Which I think gels really well with a lot of the American individualism anyways. So it'd be kind of easy for people to adopt.
Yeah, and that's I always ruffle when things are put in all these black and white places, but this goes along with what we're saying too about just developing your own conscious waking life health before you bring it into the dream world, or developing your own personal, emotional, mental health before you bring it into a relationship, like along those same lines.
Right.
Feel like there's something else I was going to jump off from what you were saying, but I really appreciate the point of like, yeah, you just brought it back into like the Sethian context. But I mean, the challenge for most of the world is just that this is such a foreign idea to
It
them.
is, yeah. So I don't blame them, but
Mhm.
I mean I think that's part of why Seth said that physical reality is a training ground, because after you graduate, you look back and you're like, oh, that's how I created so much suffering for myself. I shouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah. And I want to say Seth, I got this from Seth somewhere, but like, I think he's said, like if you do a harm with ignorantly, that's not necessarily a violation. But like, I guess one of my own personal definitions of evil, and I don't like even using the term, but like when you know something is wrong and then you do it anyways, that's getting into a different territory, right?
Philosophically, they have a word for that. It's like, I think it's pronounced like acrasia or something like that. It's basically like translates as like weak-willedness,
Yeah.
where it's like you intellectually know that you should be doing something else, but your will is so weak that you can't make yourself do it.
I like having a specific term, but I think that term narrows the motivations down more than it has to be narrowed down, because I think you could be strong-willed, but you just hate yourself, and then therefore you hate the world. You know what I mean? Or
A will fighting against itself is not strong, Michael.
okay. I mean, I see how you can like bring it back into that definition.
Yeah. Where it's like you cannot like put your energy behind the thing that you believe, which means that there's like structurally like a disconnect between your beliefs and yourself, and you have to work to resolve that.
I don't think it has to do with willpower at all. I think it's just opposing beliefs.
Yeah, right.
Because, like, here's a really trite example. You could go back in time and shoot Hitler in his crib, would you? You would know that it's wrong to shoot a baby. But it's not even a matter of wills anymore. It's between two beliefs. The belief that you're doing something good for the world versus the beliefs that you're just really bad by shooting a baby. It's not I would argue that it would take a lot of willpower to shoot a baby.
Well, but that's like a different thing though. Because like what we're talking about is like, which one of those choices is the right one, but you can't bring yourself to do it,
I get what you mean. I just grimace because I'm like, there is no right choice, because again, it depends on your beliefs, because a lot of people in today's world would think that it's right to fight for peace. But Seth would say that is exactly the wrong thing to do, but they don't know that because they believe in the physical reality. They don't believe that their thoughts create reality.
Right. But there are choices where I think it is pretty black and white that this choice is wrong and this choice is right. Like let's say the baby isn't Hitler, then it's pretty clear that the wrong choice is
yourself to not shoot the baby.
yeah, like so therefore, like when you know something is wrong, killing a baby is wrong. And God, I'm just frustrated with how like political this is getting after I say that out loud.
Yeah, how many months old is the baby?
But that's good to like have an empathy for like the reason other people believe a different thing, like if
Right, yeah. Because it's not about like whether the belief is right or not, right? It's like how like you relate to your own belief.
yeah. And I think that is a particularly like waking consciousness thing, is like we're here to like go through these experiences and get to the right sides of things, to them as much as we can, right? Like, I don't know. Does this discussion about like the existence of evil, does that imply that like this life to some extent is like a moral development?
What do you mean? Like the
Like,
fact that this
what
is
are the
like,
purposes that we're doing and taking the challenge of waking life is to like have a moral development?
well, the thing that I struggle with a lot of the Sethian stuff is it's very like beyond good and evil,
Mm-hmm.
Like when we get down to like the bottom of a lot of the Sethian like moral philosophy, it really does come out sort of like this, like good and evil isn't a thing, it's all perspectives. you sort of just have to like spiritually transcend that, you know?
But you have to get beyond it.
I don't know about that.
Well, that's kind of what he's saying in these first pages is like, if you have rigid ideas of good and evil, then you shouldn't transition to this next stage of consciousness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like in terms of like, is this world like a developing ground for like your moral beliefs? Like if you think that moral development is like moral nihilism, then yeah, I guess.
What do you mean if you think it's moral nihilism?
Because like that's the end goal, right? Is like you start in this world that has this like all these contentious like things that seem good and seem bad and seem evil, and a lot of people have different opinions about it.
I guess like, just that term threw me off. Like, but you're just saying like you get to a point where you don't need to like have these struggles.
Yeah, you can basically do away with that.
Yeah,
and you're like, all the phenomena of the world, like of the physical world that I'm experiencing is like the things I'm experiencing, but I'm not going to consider them in the moral sense, you know, because I need to work on my dream journal or whatever.
and that gets to other struggles that we have. And I've maybe mentioned this before too, and forgive me if some of this is slightly tangential to our chapter, but like, I remember Rob being very oppressed about like all the struggles and suffering in the world. And Seth had to like counsel him. And we have this in our modern day society, like the news is the bad news and it can be very overwhelming. And I think it has a huge negative effect on a lot of people. But Seth used an analogy that you're on this like huge like ocean liner. And you're just super focused on the turmoil of these waves that you're focusing on. You're like completely safe and stable, and you keep pointing towards that, and that's all you're focusing on. And he's kind of saying like, you have to accept, you know, your primary reality, which would be this cruise liner, as primary reality. Like your personal experience. Like we read in the news of all this suffering, but like, my day-to-day life is pretty amazing. And it's not a denial that those waves are out there, that the turmoil is there, but like you have a bandwidth of like how much of this worldly burden is yours to bear.
Yeah.
And you can do something about it, but you can't beat yourself up if you can't stop all the suffering in the whole world, because of course it's like billions of people are involved.
Well, I guess to extend the metaphor a little bit, I think, and this is a thing that I've been just like reading about recently, so this is why this pops in my head. It's like in the metaphor, worrying about the waves out there is like non-productive. But like seeing the waves and like understanding the turmoil of the waves, and then being the person that goes below decks and starts inspecting your hull, I think is very productive, right?
Yeah.
Like you're looking at the borderline where your primary reality interfaces with the turmoil. And I think that like the type of globalized world that we live in right now, we have sort of these like small patches of like order that have borders to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worthwhile to be curious about the borders of your specific patch of the world, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the problem, I think, psychologically, is people like, they've got the telescopic view of like the other side of the world. And they're like, holy shit, how is that part of the world so much shittier?
Yeah.
Or like, how's there so much suffering going on there? And it's like, maybe that part of the world doesn't have a border that connects with like physical border or like, you know, an ideological border, economic border, like whatever, right? That connects to your life. But like there probably is some part of the world that has some kind of suffering that does connect to your life. And it's more productive if you're actually worried about bad things in the world to focus on the ones that actually connect to you and your experience, right?
Yeah.
Like that, I think the instinct isn't, like, to clarify for the listener, if you have that instinct isn't bad. It's just directing your focus in a place that's productive, you know?
Yeah, I think it becomes a problem when it becomes so overwhelming that it's pulling you down more than it needs to, right?
Right, yeah.
Like to some extent what we were talking about earlier is kind of like what you're referencing, like getting down below deck and working on the hull when we were talking about, you know, should we participate in pacifism or should we like try to like actively meditate about peace, or, you know, like we're trying to like get underneath the causal parts that are contributing to some of these like waves and turmoil out there.
Right.
World's a complicated place. That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fond good evening.